The millionaire's daughter hadn't eaten for 2 weeks until a new maid arrived and did the impossible. Ethan Cole's house sat perched on a hill overlooking the ocean, the waves relentlessly crashing against the cliffs below, their sound echoing like the slow, measured breath of some ancient, slumbering soul. From the outside, it was picture-perfect. Gleaming white walls, expansive glass doors, a winding stone path flanked by meticulously trimmed olive trees. But inside, every room reverberated with a sound far more terrifying than any noise. Silence. It had been a full 2 weeks since Lily, his 7-year-old daughter, had stopped eating. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't cry, wouldn't even so much as move. She simply lay motionless on her bed, her eyes locked onto the ceiling as if transfixed by something invisible, a secret spectacle only she could perceive. The best doctor's money could buy had come and gone, a revolving door of therapists, nutritionists, and the most devoted caregivers, all of whom had failed to elicit any change. On the bedside table, untouched plates of expensive, carefully prepared meals sat gathering dust. Organic vegetable soup, warm rye bread, freshly squeezed fruit juice, all cold, all rejected. Downstairs, Ethan sat slumped in his office, staring blankly at the computer screen, his mind a million miles away. 3 years ago, he had been a renowned architect, celebrated for his ability to transform blueprints into houses that seemed to breathe with life. But ever since that fateful night, the night Anna, his beloved wife, died in a horrific car accident, his own house had stopped breathing. And now, even the faintest breath left in his world, the fragile spark of his daughter's life, was quietly fading away. Helen Carter, the family's longtime housekeeper, entered the office softly, her footsteps barely audible, and placed a steaming cup of coffee on his desk. "She's still not eating, is she?" Ethan's voice was a mere whisper, low and metallic, devoid of any inflection. Helen shook her head sadly. "No, sir. We've tried absolutely everything." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the window where a flock of seagulls drifted effortlessly above the shimmering silver expanse of the sea. He said nothing more. Inside his mind, everything was a tangled mess. Unfinished contracts, canceled meetings, and the haunting echo of Lily's laughter from a past life that felt as though it belonged to someone else entirely. When night fell, the lights in the house blazed brightly, but the warmth of life was conspicuously absent. The same house that architectural magazines had once hailed as a beacon of light had become a desolate house of silence. A father trapped in the suffocating prison of his own guilt, a child lost in a silent, wordless exile, and between them, a void so vast and deep that no sound, no matter how loud, could ever hope to bridge the unyielding gap. Upstairs, Lily shifted slightly in her bed, a barely perceptible movement. Outside the window, the small dog Charlie lay curled up in the corner of the yard, his dark, mournful eyes fixed on the brightly lit window above. Like his little owner, he too was waiting for something to return. A voice, a gentle touch, or simply the comforting warmth of the love that had once permeated every corner of their lives. The next morning, the sun rose with agonizing slowness, painting the perfectly manicured olive trees that lined the driveway in shimmering shades of gold. Helen opened the front door to a small, unassuming woman clutching a faded canvas bag and wearing worn-out sneakers. "Good morning. I'm Maria Alvarez," she said, her voice surprisingly warm and soft, like the gentle caress of early sunlight. "The agency sent me for the kitchen assistant position." Helen nodded curtly, glancing impatiently at her watch. "You're late. The bus broke down," Maria answered with an apologetic smile that radiated genuine sincerity. "I had to take 3 different ones to get here." Stepping inside, Maria paused, momentarily overwhelmed. The kitchen around her was larger than the cramped apartment she shared with her aging mother and younger brother back in the city. Marble walls, gleaming oak counters, expansive windows that offered breathtaking views of the sea. Everything was perfect, pristine, and utterly cold. "The rules here are simple," Helen said, her voice flat and practiced, as if reciting lines from a well-worn manual. "You help prepare meals, wash the dishes, keep everything spotless. Don't speak to Mr. Cole unless he speaks to you first. Under no circumstances are you to go near the girl's room. And absolutely no questions. Understood? Yes, ma'am, Maria replied softly, her voice barely audible. Helen hesitated for a moment, her expression softening slightly. The girl, she's sick. Just don't ask. Just do your work. Maria nodded again, but in her warm, brown eyes flickered something that had been sorely missing from the house for a long time. Empathy. When Helen left, Maria stood alone in the gleaming, sterile kitchen, her hands trembling almost imperceptibly. On the counter lay the ingredients for the day's meals, already neatly arranged. Vegetables, chicken, bread. The air smelled faintly of food, yet it lacked the most vital ingredient of all life. She washed her hands thoroughly and began to chop the vegetables. The rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board echoed gently through the cavernous space, momentarily filling the oppressive silence of the house. For a fleeting moment, she caught her reflection in the gleaming refrigerator door. An ordinary woman, her skin browned by the sun, her eyes etched with the subtle marks of years of struggle. But within those eyes lingered a quiet, unwavering faith, the unwavering belief that even in the coldest, most desolate of places, warmth could find its way back if someone was patient enough to wait, willing to nurture it back to life. Around noon, Helen returned, her face etched with a weariness that belied her years of service. Mr. Cole will have his lunch in his office. Prepare his tray first. Maria nodded, arranging the dishes neatly on the silver tray with practiced efficiency. Maria carefully carried the dinner tray up the grand staircase, her steps slow and measured, as if she were afraid that any sudden movement or sound might shatter the fragile silence that hung so heavily over the house. Her shoes clicked softly against the polished wooden floor, their sound mingling with the faint scent of expensive cologne and furniture wax, a scent that felt foreign, as though it belonged to another world entirely. When she reached the second-floor hallway, she noticed a door standing slightly ajar. Inside, Ethan Cole sat rigidly at his desk, his back ramrod straight, the cold, blue glow of the computer screen outlining his face in a tired, almost ethereal halo of light. He didn't even bother to look up. "Your meal, sir," Maria said softly, her voice cautious and respectful. "Leave it," Ethan replied curtly, his eyes still glued to the screen. She placed the tray down carefully, her hands trembling slightly despite her best efforts. The faint, lingering smell of stale, cold coffee permeated the air, the bitter trace of too many sleepless nights spent wrestling with demons only he could see. Maria stood there for a moment, waiting expectantly, but he said nothing more, offering no further acknowledgement of her presence. Ethan leaned back wearily in his chair, exhaling quietly, his gaze never lifting from the screen. "You can go," he said finally, his voice devoid of any emotion. His tone wasn't harsh or unkind, just tired, detached. The voice of a man who had long since forgotten how to speak to anyone outside the sterile confines of his work. Maria nodded silently. "Yes, sir." She turned to leave, but as she did, her gaze fell upon a photo frame tilted precariously beside the desk. A young woman with soft, cascading curls and a gentle, radiant smile, standing beside a little girl with bright, sparkling eyes. Lily. Maria's chest tightened with a sudden wave of emotion. She understood in that instant that she had stepped into a house filled with an unspoken, all-consuming grief, a sorrow that permeated every corner of the once happy home. She whispered her words, barely louder than a breath, a silent plea for help. God, may someone, somehow, bring her back to life. That afternoon, the kitchen was once again bathed in the soft, golden light of sunset, the warm hues casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Helen was meticulously preparing Lily's meal tray, as she had done every single day for the past 2 weeks. A small bowl of carrot soup, a single slice of toasted bread, and a glass of almond milk. Everything was arranged with painstaking care, but everyone knew, deep down, that it would all come back untouched, just as it had been taken up, a silent testament to the little girl's unwavering refusal to eat. Maria watched Helen's trembling hands with a mixture of pity and concern. She had served this household faithfully for over 20 years, yet her eyes now carried a heaviness, a profound sorrow that seemed to belong to someone else's grief, a burden far too heavy for one person to bear. "Let me take it up to the girl," Maria said softly, her voice filled with genuine empathy. Helen looked up, startled by the unexpected offer. "No need. I'm used to it." "Please, ma'am," Maria insisted gently, her tone both respectful and firm. Helen hesitated, her gaze searching Maria's face. There was something in Maria's eyes, a quiet sincerity, a genuine kindness that she hadn't seen in this house for a very long time. After a few seconds of thoughtful consideration, she nodded slowly. "All right, but if the master or the child reacts badly, you'll have to leave immediately. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." Maria lifted the tray carefully with both hands and walked slowly up the grand staircase, her footsteps measured and deliberate, as if she were carrying something sacred, something infinitely precious. The higher she went, the heavier the air seemed to become, as if the weight of the house's collective sorrow was pressing down upon her. Each step felt like climbing toward another world, a place where time stood still and sadness had taken on a tangible shape. The door to Lily's room was slightly ajar. Helen knocked softly, her knuckles barely making contact with the wood. "Sweetheart, dinner's here." No answer, only the faint, shallow sound of breathing emanating from within. Helen gestured silently for Maria to go in. Lily's room looked like a scene plucked straight from the pages of a fairy tale gone wrong. Pale pink walls, sheer white curtains that billowed gently in the breeze. Dolls neatly lined up on the shelves, their painted smiles mocking the oppressive sadness that permeated the air. Yet the air felt so cold, so devoid of life, that Maria shivered involuntarily. On the bed, Lily lay turned toward the window, her small, frail body barely visible beneath the thick covers, watching the sun as it slowly began to set. She was so fragile, so ethereal. It seemed as though she might simply vanish into thin air if someone were to touch her too harshly. Maria placed the tray carefully on the small bedside table. "Hello, Lily," she whispered gently, her voice barely audible above the silence. "I'm Maria. I just arrived today." No response. Maria didn't give up. She pulled a small chair close to the bed and sat down, her hands clasped gently in her lap, radiating a quiet sense of calm. "I heard you don't like these meals," she said softly, glancing at the still steaming bowl of soup with a knowing expression. "I once cared for a little girl just like you where I used to work. She wouldn't eat either, not because the food was bad, but because she was sad." Lily's long, delicate eyelashes fluttered slightly, a barely perceptible movement. Maria noticed with a flicker of hope that the child was listening, however passively. "One day," Maria continued, her voice softening, turning into the gentle, soothing rhythm of a bedtime story, "I toasted her a single slice of bread, just plain olive oil and a tiny pinch of salt. Nothing special, nothing fancy, but I told her it was healing bread. My mother used to make it for me whenever the world felt too heavy to bear." A long, pregnant silence filled the room. Then, Lily blinked, her eyes momentarily losing their vacant stare. "Healing bread." Her voice was faint, raspy, almost like a sigh carried on the wind. Maria smiled gently. "Yes, healing bread. Would you like to try some?" Lily didn't answer. She simply looked at Maria for a long time, her gaze intense and unwavering. And in those sad, brown eyes, for the first time since Maria had entered the house, a tiny spark of light appeared. Small, almost imperceptible, but undeniably real. Helen, still standing anxiously at the doorway, covered her mouth with her hand as tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. Maria remained perfectly still, her voice soft and reassuring, like a gentle breeze. "That's all right, sweetheart. I won't make you eat. I just want you to know that there's someone here who wants to sit with you, whether you eat or not." Lily turned her face slowly toward Maria, her expression unreadable. Neither of them spoke again. Between them, the silence no longer felt frightening, oppressive. It became a safe space, a sanctuary where hearts could begin to breathe again, to heal, to hope. The next morning, soft sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, scattering golden reflections across the walls and countertops. Maria stood by the stove, her hands busy preparing ingredients, but her thoughts were far away, replaying the events of the previous evening in her mind. She couldn't shake the image of Lily's eyes from her memory, empty yet with that faint spark of life, like a single ember surviving the aftermath of a devastating storm. Helen entered the kitchen quietly, her movements hesitant, and began to prepare a cup of coffee, her usual morning ritual. "You spoke to her, didn't you?" she asked, her tone wavering precariously between suspicion and hope. "Just a few words," Maria replied with a gentle, reassuring smile. "But I think she was listening." Helen said nothing, just nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the swirling steam rising from her cup. When she left, she deliberately didn't close the kitchen door all the way, leaving it slightly ajar. An unspoken gesture of trust, a silent acknowledgement of the glimmer of hope that Maria had brought into the house. Maria opened a cupboard, took out a loaf of plain white bread, a bottle of good quality olive oil, and a small jar of sea salt. She cut a thick slice of bread and placed it carefully on a hot pan, letting it turn golden brown, its surface sizzling gently. The warm, comforting scent filled the air, honest, alive, a stark contrast to the sterile emptiness that had permeated the house for so long. She whispered softly to herself, "All right, little one, let's try again today." By 10 a.m., Helen returned to the kitchen, surprised to see Maria preparing a different tray than usual. "What's that?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "Bread with olive oil and salt," Maria said simply, her eyes twinkling with a quiet confidence. "I just want to see if my healing bread still works." Helen hesitated, her brow furrowed with doubt, then sighed wearily. "Go ahead. We've already tried everything else." Maria wrapped the golden slice of bread in a soft linen cloth and placed it carefully on the tray, along with a glass of fresh water. She climbed the stairs slowly, her heart heavy with anticipation, but her steps steady and determined. When she knocked gently on Lily's door, there was no answer. The door creaked open slightly, revealing Lily lying listlessly on her side, her eyes fixed on the window, her hair tangled around her face like threads of spun light. Maria set the tray down on the bedside table and gently pulled the old, worn chair closer to the bed. "Good morning, Lily," she whispered, her voice warm and comforting. "I brought you something special today." No response. Maria unfolded the cloth, revealing the golden slice of bread. The subtle, yet enticing aroma of olive oil drifted softly through the room, filling the air with a sense of warmth and comfort. "This is my grandmother's recipe," she said, her voice conspiratorial, like sharing a cherished secret. "She called it the bread that heals the soul. It's nothing fancy, nothing complicated. But she said its taste reminds you that there are still good things left in the world, even when everything seems dark and hopeless." Lily blinked slowly, turning her head slightly toward Maria. "Heals the soul?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Maria smiled gently. "Just a tiny bite. You don't have to eat it if you don't want to. Just smell it. The smell of hope." Lily stared intently at the bread, then back at Maria, her gaze a mixture of fear, doubt, and something else, something that Maria hadn't seen in her eyes before: curiosity. Maria said nothing more. She just sat there patiently, her eyes calm and kind, ready to wait forever if that's what it took. After what felt like an eternity, Lily slowly reached out her hand. Her small fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as they touched the warm, golden crust of the bread. It was warm, soft, real, a tangible connection to the world outside her own inner darkness. Maria held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Lily tore off a tiny piece of the bread and brought it hesitantly to her lips. Silence. Then, she closed her eyes and chewed slowly, savoring the simple, yet profound taste. A single tear slid silently down her cheek and fell onto her hand. Maria smiled gently, her heart overflowing with hope. "That's it, sweetheart. Take your time." Lily opened her eyes, looking directly at Maria, her gaze searching, questioning. Something inside those eyes began to melt, the thin, almost impenetrable wall between fear and trust slowly beginning to crumble. She tore off another piece of the bread, then another, her movements becoming slightly more confident with each bite. Helen, standing quietly by the door, pressed a trembling hand to her chest, tears welling up in her eyes, blurring her vision. And then, a low, trembling voice broke the silence that had enveloped the room for so long. "What's going on here?" Maria turned her head sharply. Ethan Cole stood there in his impeccably tailored gray suit, his face tight with confusion and disbelief. He looked at his daughter, his eyes wide with astonishment, her mouth full of crumbs of bread. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory. Helen stepped forward hesitantly. "This is Maria, the new kitchen assistant, sir." Ethan's eyes flicked back and forth between Maria and the bread in his daughter's hand, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You fed her bread?" "Yes, sir," Maria replied calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Without the doctor's permission?" Maria's voice remained steady, her tone unwavering. "She didn't need medicine, Mr. Cole. She needed to be seen." Ethan froze, his anger momentarily dissipating in the face of Maria's unwavering conviction. Before he could reply, Lily's tiny voice broke the silence, her words clear and distinct. "Daddy, I'm eating." Ethan froze completely, his entire body rigid with shock. A single tear slipped down Lily's cheek, landing on the hand that held the bread. Maria whispered softly, her voice filled with compassion. She just needed someone to believe she could, someone to stay by her side while she tried. Ethan looked at Maria, his eyes searching hers for answers. There was no defiance in her gaze, no fear, only the quiet honesty of a woman who had nothing left to prove. He turned away abruptly, covering his face with one hand, his shoulders slumping with defeat. "I've tried everything," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "Everything I could." He stepped back slowly and sank into the chair beside the bed, his hands gripping his head tightly. "I paid for every cure money could buy, but none of them could fix me." His voice cracked, his emotions raw and exposed. "And now she's fading before my eyes, and I can't stop it." Maria didn't move, her presence a quiet source of strength. Helen stayed silent, her eyes filled with compassion. Only the sound of the distant sea filled the room, a constant, mournful reminder of the pain that had consumed their lives. "3 years ago," Ethan whispered, his voice shaking like a confession. "Anna, my wife, she died in a car accident. Couldn't save her. I swore I'd protect Lily, that nothing would ever hurt her again. But look at her." He lifted his head, his eyes red and swollen, his words cracking open a dam of pent-up grief. "She's fading right in front of me, and I can't stop it." Maria took a quiet step forward, her presence radiating a sense of calm and understanding. Her voice was soft as a prayer, filled with unwavering hope. "No, sir, she's not fading. She's just trying to find a reason to live again." Ethan stared at her, his eyes hollow and filled with despair. "A reason to live?" "Yes," Maria replied gently. "She needs to feel that this world is still safe, that someone will stay, even when things aren't perfect. Maybe what she needs isn't another doctor, another medication. Maybe she just needs someone willing to sit beside her and be silent, too." Ethan lowered his head, his fists clenched tightly in his lap. "I don't know how to do that. I'm not good at comforting." "Start by being here," Maria said, her tone both gentle and firm. "Sit here. Look at your daughter not as a patient, not as a problem to be solved, but as a child who's still waiting for her father to hold her again, to tell her everything will be all right." Ethan slowly turned his head and looked at Lily. She was sitting upright on the bed, holding the bread with both hands, her eyes fixed on him, searching, pleading. That gaze stole his breath, filled with an innocence, a trust, and a love that he had long forgotten how to feel, that he had buried deep beneath layers of grief and guilt. He rose slowly, walked to the bed, and sat down on the edge, his movements hesitant, as if afraid to break something fragile. Maria stepped back, giving him space for what mattered most. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then extended his hand, careful, trembling, afraid to break the delicate connection that was forming between them. Lily looked at his outstretched hand, then gently placed her small hand into his. A tear fell silently from her eye, then another, tracing shimmering lines down her pale cheek. Ethan closed his hand gently around hers, whispering, his voice trembling with emotion. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I left you alone for too long. I have been lost." Lily said nothing. She just nodded slowly and rested her head against his shoulder, seeking the comfort and security she had been missing for so long. Maria stood silently, tears glimmering in her eyes, reflecting the soft light in the room. Perhaps she had just witnessed the holiest of miracles, a heart learning how to love again, a family finding its way back from the brink of despair. The air in the room softened, the oppressive weight of sadness beginning to lift. The last light of day slipped through the sheer curtains, wrapping father and daughter in a tender, golden hue. Lily still rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, her tiny hand gripping his tightly, as if afraid to let go. Maria stood silently, about to step out of the room to give them space, when Lily's small fingers caught the hem of her shirt, stopping her in her tracks. "Don't go," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible, filled with a desperate plea. Maria nodded gently and sat back down on the chair beside the bed, offering a silent promise of unwavering support. She said nothing. Helen stayed by the doorway, quietly wiping her tears with an old, embroidered handkerchief, her heart overflowing with joy and relief. Ethan took a deep breath, his trembling hand brushing gently across his daughter's back. "Sweetheart, why did you stop eating? Why would you do that to yourself?" His voice cracked with a mixture of fear, guilt, and overwhelming pain. Lily was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. Then, in a voice as small as a breath, she said, "Because I was scared. I didn't want to be alone." Ethan bent closer, his voice breaking with emotion. "Scared of what, my love? What were you scared of?" Lily lifted her head, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Scared that if I got better, you'd go back to work all the time, that you'd be busy again and the house would be quiet like before. I don't want that." Each word cut into Ethan's heart like shards of glass, shattering the carefully constructed walls he had built around himself. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer an explanation, but no sound came out. His chest rose and fell with the weight of the devastating realization that he had been so consumed by his own grief that he had failed to see his daughter's pain, to understand her deepest fears. "I miss Mom," Lily continued, her voice trembling with sadness. "Since she died, you haven't been home much. Every time you came back, you looked at me, but you weren't really there. I thought that if I got sick, you would stay, and you did." Her voice trembled with the weight of her confession, tears tracing fragile lines down her pale cheeks. "I didn't want to make you sad, Daddy. I just didn't want to be alone anymore." The room was so quiet that they could hear the gentle rustling of the sea breeze outside the window, a sound that had once been a source of comfort, but had become a constant reminder of their loss. Ethan leaned forward and pulled her gently into his arms, holding her tight as if afraid she might vanish if he let go, as if he could somehow erase the pain she had been carrying for so long. "I'm so sorry, Lily," he whispered, his voice breaking between sobs. "I didn't know. I was wrong. I thought if I worked hard, earned enough money, gave you everything that money could buy, that would make you happy, that would fill the void in your heart. But I forgot the most important thing." He exhaled shakily, tears glistening on his cheeks, reflecting the soft light in the room. "I forgot that you needed me. Not the man who provides, but the father who stays, the father who listens, the father who loves you unconditionally." Lily squeezed his hand tightly, offering a silent gesture of forgiveness. "Daddy, will you still go to work?" Ethan chuckled softly through his tears, a genuine sound of amusement that hadn't been heard in the house for years. "Yes, I still have to go to work, sweetheart, but not like before." I promise I'll be home for dinner every night, no matter what, even if it's just bread with oil and salt. No more late nights. No more canceled dinners. Maria smiled gently, tears bright in her eyes. She knew that in that quiet, fragile moment, she had witnessed the true miracle, the kind that no doctor could ever prescribe, the kind that came from the depths of the human heart. Lily turned toward Maria, her eyes filled with gratitude, and whispered, "Miss Maria, thank you for not leaving. Thank you for caring." Maria held the girl's hand gently, offering a reassuring squeeze. "No one deserves to be left behind just because they're sad, Lily. Everyone deserves someone to care, no matter what." Outside, the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and the soothing murmur of waves, a symphony of nature that seemed to celebrate their newfound hope. The sun sank slowly below the horizon, painting streaks of amber and crimson across the vast expanse of the sky. Inside that small room, a child had just found the courage to speak her deepest fears, and a father had just learned how to listen with his heart instead of his mind, how to truly see his daughter for who she was. The next morning, the sky was a pale, cerulean blue, and the sea breeze carried a soft, salty scent through the open windows, filling the house with a sense of freshness and renewal. Sunlight scattered across the glass panes, creating dancing patterns of light on the walls, and for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel so heavy, so burdened by grief. Maria came to the kitchen earlier than usual, her heart filled with anticipation. She organized the spice jars, wiped down the counters, and carefully set out flour, olive oil, and sea salt, preparing for a new day, a new beginning. She had a plan, a quiet hope that she could help Lily rediscover the simple joys of life. Helen walked into the kitchen with a cup of tea, watching Maria with a mixture of curiosity and a faint smile, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "More healing bread?" Maria grinned, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Not exactly. Today we'll let the little one make her own." Helen raised an eyebrow skeptically, then chuckled softly, shaking her head in disbelief. "I've never seen Mr. Cole let anyone touch this kitchen. He guards it like a sacred space. Maybe it's time this house allowed a bit of mess," Maria said, her tone playful but kind. "A little chaos, a little bit of life." By late morning, Ethan appeared at the doorway, his presence hesitant, almost shy. He wore a simple white shirt, no tie, his hair slightly tousled, as if he had just woken up. For the first time since Maria had arrived at the house, he didn't look like a powerful, intimidating businessman, burdened by responsibility and grief. He looked like a father, a human being, learning to breathe again, rediscovering the simple joys of life. "Maria," he said softly, his voice tentative, almost apologetic. "Lily wants to see you." Maria smiled, her heart soaring with joy. "Perfect. I was just about to go find her." Moments later, Lily came into the kitchen barefoot, her hair tied loosely in a ponytail, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. She already looked more alive, more vibrant than Maria had ever seen her. "Good morning, Lily." Maria greeted her gently, her voice filled with warmth and affection. "I have a mission for you today." "What is it?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "To make healing bread, but this time, you'll be the one making it." Lily's eyes widened with excitement. She glanced at her father for approval, her gaze searching his face. Ethan smiled faintly and nodded, his eyes filled with love and encouragement. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Have fun. Make a mess." Maria placed a ball of soft, pliable dough on the counter and showed Lily the basic techniques. "First, we need to use your palms to press down gently, then fold it back. Like this." She demonstrated the movement, her hands moving with practiced ease. Lily followed her lead, her movements a bit clumsy at first, but clearly delighted by the feel of the dough between her fingers. "That's it," Maria encouraged, her voice filled with praise. "Feel it with your hands, Lily. Dough needs to be touched with care, not with hurry. Let's give it the respect it deserves. The energy in our hands transfer to our food." Ethan stood there silently, watching them, his heart filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. A small cloud of flour rose in the air, catching the sunlight like a flurry of snow, creating a magical, almost ethereal atmosphere. For the first time in years, laughter echoed in his kitchen, light, pure, and real, chasing away the ghosts of the past. Lily looked up at him, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Daddy, do you want to try?" Ethan blinked, momentarily taken aback by the offer. "Me? I've never even baked before." Maria interrupted teasingly, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Then today is your first time. There is always time to learn." He sighed, smiling despite himself, and rolled up his sleeves, ready to embrace the unknown. Standing beside Lily, he hesitantly placed his hands on the dough, unsure of what to do. It was sticky, cool, soft, alive, a sensory experience he hadn't allowed himself to enjoy for far too long. "Like this?" he asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Not quite," Lily giggled, gently correcting his technique. "You're scaring it. Be gentler, Daddy. Dough is delicate, just like people." Maria laughed, her heart filled with joy, and Helen covered her mouth with her hand, smiling from the doorway, witnessing the transformation of a family. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, the kitchen of the Cole house was filled with laughter, a sound that chased away the shadows and brought a sense of warmth and hope to the once desolate home. When the bread finally came out of the oven, its warm, inviting aroma spread through every corner of the house, filling the air with a sense of comfort and home. Maria drizzled the warm bread with olive oil, sprinkled it with sea salt, and divided it into 4 equal pieces. "Now," she said, her eyes twinkling with anticipation. "New rule. Whoever eats first must say one thing they're thankful for today." Helen chuckled softly, shaking her head with amusement. "I suppose you just made that up." "Yes," Maria replied with a mischievous grin. "But I think it'll work." Lily went first, her voice filled with gratitude. "I'm thankful that I can eat again and that Daddy's here with me. It is so good to laugh together." Ethan swallowed hard, his voice rough with emotion. "And I'm thankful that you're still here to remind me what love really means, Lily. You are my guiding star. Thank you, Maria and Helen." Maria's eyes shimmered with tears, her heart overflowing with joy. Helen smiled quietly, her eyes filled with compassion. "I'm thankful that this kitchen finally feels like a home. After so many years, my dream came true." They all ate together, their voices quiet, their hearts full. No more words were needed, only the comforting scent of bread, olive oil, and warmth. The quiet perfume of a new beginning, a fresh start. Maria glanced at Ethan. He was watching his daughter with soft, loving eyes, his hand resting gently on her hair, a silent gesture of love and protection. And she murmured to herself almost like a prayer, her heart filled with gratitude. Sometimes salvation doesn't come from grand miracles, but from a simple meal shared with those we love, from the simple act of being present, of caring, of listening with an open heart. 3 months passed. The house by the sea had lost its silence entirely. The sounds of laughter, the patter of footsteps, and the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread now formed the soundtrack to their days. Inside the kitchen, Lily's artwork adorned the refrigerator depictions of a family of 3, a golden loaf of bread, and a cheerfully rendered dog with a distinctly curly tail. Underneath one particular drawing, scrawled in a child's uneven handwriting, were the words, "My home." Maria continued her routine of arriving each morning and departing at sunset. However, her role had expanded far beyond that of a mere kitchen assistant. She had become Lily's cherished friend, her enthusiastic baking companion, and the quiet source of warmth that had permeated and filled the once desolate and chilly spaces of the Cole house. One afternoon in June, Ethan found himself standing by the window, his gaze directed toward the lush garden outside. Lily was engrossed in play with their new white dog, her laughter ringing out as the playful canine tugged at a bright red scarf she held in her hands. That laughter, so light, so free, so utterly genuine, caused a pang in his chest. But this time it wasn't a pang of sorrow. It was a profound ache of unadulterated joy. Maria approached him, carefully carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. "It's a truly beautiful sight, isn't it?" she remarked softly, a gentle and knowing smile gracing her lips. Ethan chuckled softly in response. "I used to operate under the assumption that happiness was synonymous with perfection. Now I'm beginning to understand that it's simply this." Maria extended one of the mugs toward him. "Yeah, perfection is exhausting, sir. Peace isn't." Ethan turned his gaze to her, his eyes filled with a newfound understanding. "Do you even realize that you saved them?" Maria shook her head gently, her tender smile deepening. "No, sir, I didn't save anyone. I simply sat down, listened attentively, and waited patiently until they were ready to embrace life again." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. The rhythmic sound of the waves blended harmoniously with the gentle whisper of the wind as it rustled through the leaves of the olive trees. After a while, Ethan spoke again, his voice low and filled with emotion. "After Anna passed away, I stopped believing in anything good. But you reminded me that it still exists." He paused, then continued, "The feeling of being trusted, of being truly seen for who I am." Maria turned to face him, her eyes filled with a serene and unwavering calmness. "We never truly lose the ones we love, you know. They simply undergo a transformation, becoming an integral part of the people we encounter along our journey." Ethan offered a faint smile, his eyes glinting in the soft evening light. "Do you know what Lily calls you?" Maria's brow furrowed slightly in curiosity. "No, what does she call me?" "She calls you the woman with healing hands." Maria laughed softly, her eyes beginning to glisten with unshed tears. "I only know how to bake bread." "Sometimes," Ethan replied with a knowing smile, "bread can heal the heart too." Outside, Lily's infectious laughter mingled with the playful barking of the dog, the sounds drifting through the open windows. For the first time since Anna's passing, Ethan felt as though the house was breathing again, alive with warmth and joy. One morning near the end of summer, Maria entered the kitchen earlier than her usual time. She wasn't wearing her customary apron. Instead, she was dressed in a light jacket and carried a small, unassuming bag. Her face was composed, but her eyes betrayed a hint of hesitation and uncertainty. Ethan was the first to notice the subtle change in her demeanor. "Is something wrong, Maria?" Maria nodded softly, her gaze meeting his. "My mother's ill. I need to go home for a few days to take care of her." A heavy silence descended upon the kitchen. Even the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread seemed to diminish slightly. Helen paused mid-pour with the teapot, her movements frozen in place. Lily, who had been happily coloring at the table, lifted her head, the crayon slipping from her small hand. "You're leaving." Her voice was barely audible, trembling like a fragile whisper afraid of being heard. Maria walked over to Lily and knelt beside her, meeting her gaze. "Just for a few days, Lily, that's all. I have to be with my mother for a little while, but I'll come back. Promise?" She held her breath, waiting for Lily's response. "Promise." Lily didn't speak for a moment, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Then, suddenly, she threw her arms around Maria, holding on tightly as if she would never let go. "I'm scared you won't come back," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Mom once said, just for a few days, too." Her words hung heavy in the air, laden with unspoken grief and the lingering pain of loss. Ethan turned away, his own eyes clouded with a quiet pain that mirrored Lily's. Maria hugged Lily closer, whispering gently in her ear, "Lily, some people leave forever. That's true. But some leave only to return because they mean to keep their promise." Lily looked up at Maria, her eyes glistening with tears. "You'll promise, right? You really will?" Maria smiled reassuringly and held out her pinky finger. "A pinky promise. The most serious promise there is." Lily lifted her tiny finger and hooked it with Maria's. "It's a deal," she whispered, her voice filled with a newfound hope. "Yes," Maria said softly, her eyes filled with love. "And this one has no expiration date." For a moment, the kitchen was completely still, the silence broken only by the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. Ethan leaned against the doorway, the soft morning light illuminating his tired yet gentle face. He looked at them, the child who had tentatively learned to trust again and the woman who had patiently taught them both the true meaning of unconditional love. When Maria stood to leave, Ethan stepped forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you sure? I can arrange for someone to help your mother if needed." Maria shook her head gently. "Thank you, Ethan, but my mother only needs her daughter right now. That's all." They walked to the door together, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. Lily ran after Maria, hugging her one last time, her small arms wrapped tightly around her waist. "I'll count the days," she said, her voice muffled against Maria's jacket. Maria bent down and kissed her forehead, her eyes filled with affection. "Then I'd better hurry back, hadn't I?" As she stepped outside, the sea breeze lifted her hair, carrying with it a trace of salt and a hint of sorrow. Ethan stood on the porch, watching her figure grow smaller as she walked along the curved path that led toward the shore. Rain began to drizzle softly over the olive trees, leaving crystal droplets clinging to each leaf. Ethan stood in the kitchen, a mug of coffee warming his hands, his eyes fixed on the black iron gate outside. It had been 7 long days since Maria had left, and that morning, as he stood there, he heard the distinct sound of familiar footsteps approaching. Lily was the first to react, bursting out of the house like a bolt of lightning. "Miss Maria!" Her joyous shout rang through the air, followed by the excited barking of the white dog. Maria stepped into the yard, her coat damp from the rain, her hair tousled by the persistent sea breeze. Before she could utter a single word, Lily threw herself into her arms, nearly knocking her off balance. "You're back. I counted every single day. I really did." Maria laughed, hugging her tightly. "I promised, remember? And some promises don't expire." Ethan stepped onto the porch, his heart swelling with emotion. He didn't speak. He simply watched them. The child shining like sunlight after a long storm and the woman who had brought breath back into his home, filling it with life and laughter. His gaze softened, mirroring the calmness of the sea after a tempest. "How's your mother?" he asked, his voice gentle. "She's much better, thank you," Maria said, smiling warmly. "She sends her heartfelt thanks for allowing me to be here." Ethan nodded and gestured toward the open door. The kitchen was filled with the comforting aroma of warm bread. Helen was smiling as she poured tea, as if she had known all along that Maria would return today. Lily sat close beside Maria, her small hand never leaving hers. She recounted everything that had happened in Maria's absence, how she had ruined 3 loaves of bread in her attempts to bake, how the dog had dug up the flower bed in the garden, and how her dad had tried to make soup and almost burned the house down in the process. Maria laughed until tears welled up in her eyes, and Ethan could only shake his head, smiling too. That warmth, that easy and uninhibited laughter, was something he had once believed he had lost forever. By afternoon, the rain had ceased. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light across the garden where Lily played with the dog. Ethan and Maria stood by the window, watching them, their hearts filled with contentment. "Thank you, Maria," Ethan murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "for bringing life back to this house, and to me." Maria shook her head gently, her eyes meeting his. "I only opened the door, Ethan. It was you and Lily who bravely stepped out of the darkness." He remained silent for a moment, absorbing her words, then reached out his hand, his fingers outstretched. Maria looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and understanding, then placed her hand in his. It was a rough, calloused hand, yet warm and reassuring, trembling ever so slightly. They stood there together by the window that overlooked the verdant lawn, bathed in the soft afternoon light. Lily ran in joyous circles, the dog playfully chasing after her, sunlight spilling over her honey-colored hair, transforming the entire scene into a vibrant and living painting. Maria whispered softly, afraid to break the spell. "She's going to be all right, Ethan." Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving his daughter. "I know, and so will I." This time, truly, their hands remained clasped in quiet stillness, a silent promise passing between them. The afternoon light stretched long and languid, gentle and warm, enveloping them in its embrace. A family, not perfect, but healing little by little, finding solace and strength in each other's presence. And within it all, an unspoken promise lingered, hanging in the air like the scent of wildflowers. That tomorrow, no matter what challenges or uncertainties may lie ahead, they will share breakfast, share laughter, and share life together.